Hello. So today I'm joined by Mr. Tuhin Sinha, who is National Spokesperson of BJP. He is also an author who has authored several books. He has written two books on tribal leaders, Sido Kanhu and Birsamunda, and he has also authored a new book, which is Climate Action India. So thank you, Tuhin Sinha, for joining us.
My pleasure.
It's a pleasure. So I will start with your new book, Climate Action India. So what is it about? And tell us, give us a brief overview of the book.
Well, with every book of mine, I have experimented with a new subject, with a new genre. If you have followed my journey as an author in the last 17 years or 18 years, I have always tried to experiment with new genres. And now, with my role as the national spokesperson of BJP, with my entrenchment in politics, I have been all the more trying to identify the right, policy related subjects or governance related subjects which will impact the future of the country over the next 2 decades. Now, climate is a subject which is, of utmost importance to the future generation, to the country. I think the world is grappling with a climate war, but unfortunately, not many governments have given the kind of importance which the subject demands. Thankfully, under Prime Minister Modi, India at COP26 at Glasgow in 2021 has set some very high targets. He gave the Prime Minister Modi gave the mantra of Panchamrit, a 5 point policy, a 5 point vision for climate action, which which included the overall overriding target of reducing carbon emissions in the country or bringing it to zero, which is called the net zero mission by 2070. And leading up to that, there were four important pointers, which included achieving 500 gigawatt of non-fossil energy by 2030, which we have nearly achieved. That included reducing the carbon intensity of in our country by a good 45%. So many of these things required very assiduous, study, because to make sure that all our state governments, to make sure that all our stakeholders are strictly sticking to the agenda, we needed a more detailed study of what's happening around net zero mission. That is what forms the crux of this book. So there are several components which are adding up to the journey. Our expansion or our transition into renewable sources of energy, which includes electromobility, which includes the way we have transitioned into embracing solar energy, and schemes like Pradhan Mantri Muft Bijli Surya Ghar Yojana, if you are aware of it, they are
Yes,
absolute game
yeah.
changers. They are absolute game changers when it comes to incentivizing people to transition to solar energy. So
Even
it
there are several
democratizes.
yojanas like PM Kushum Yojana and
Yes,
many others which are helping the farmers also and the
absolutely.
rural
So
areas.
this book co-authored with Dr. Kaviraj Singh, who has been a pioneer who has actually pioneered climate entrepreneurship in the country, who runs a carbon credit offset agency, one of the leading ones in the country, called Earthhood. He's my co-author on the project. And the book delves into all of those components, all of those quintessential important components, which we feel are going to be crucial enablers in our net zero mission journey from here. So it gives you a ringside view of where our preparedness stands and where we stand and how well equipped are we to achieve that mission going ahead.
Oh, so I will add one thing to that. I recently visited the Mobility Expo, which happened at the Bharat Mandapam. I saw made in Bharat companies are making renewable energy cars. They are using energy electric vehicles, and they are also producing electric vehicle helicopters. Can you believe? I don't know whether you
No,
are aware of
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
I think we have, in the last few years, we have taken massive strides when it comes to adopting electrical vehicles. There are obviously related challenges. For example, you need that many more charging points. You need a proper mechanism to dispose of used batteries, and all of these need are being worked upon. I would say they are still work in progress, but electromobility is the way forward, and Prime Minister Modi had realized it very early, way back in 2014-15, and I think in a very diligent manner, the government has been moving towards facilitating electromobility in the country. So, in fact,
Okay.
I don't think there is any automobile, manufacturer in the country today who doesn't have a parallel electro, electrical vehicles coming out. I don't know how feasible it would be for them in terms of business, because when you manufacture both petrol, diesel, and electrical vehicles simultaneously, I'm not sure whether the sales match up. But then the effort is very laudable, and the effort is something which the future generations of the country are going to be grateful for.
So we will leave it here. So now coming on your books on the tribal leaders, you wrote a book on Birsa Munda, you wrote a book on Sidhu Kanu. So tell us about these leaders, these books. So how it impacted our society and just the knowledge in the general masses. Do the general masses have this much of knowledge about these tribal leaders? Do they know their struggles?
So, Bikramji, I grew up in a place called Jamshedpur, and Jamshedpur is surrounded by tribal areas. So, while growing up, in our growing up years, we would often hear about Birsa Munda and Sido Kanhu. We would come across statues of Birsa Munda at different places in Jharkhand. But unfortunately, because there was a colonial mindset with which we approached history in those days, there was no authentic written content around these tribal heroes. So whenever I would be curious to find out more about Birsa Munda, I would have to struggle with the authenticated content. I think a lot of this changed post 2014. Prime Minister Modi put a lot of importance on you know giving our subaltern heroes, our tribal freedom fighters, their due. I don't think any prime minister has invoked the sacrifice of tribal heroes as many times as Prime Minister Modi has done. Now, as an author, after having written 7 or 8 books around 2018-19, I was struggling with that one big idea which could motivate me for the next few years. And that is when I decided to move inwards. I revived that curiosity of my initial years. I went back to my childhood years and decided to I imagined I was in Jamshedpur, and I started, imagining. I started imagining
Writing
the
about
school
your
days when I.
childhood heroes. You're writing about your childhood heroes.
I won't say they were childhood heroes, because, like I
Okay.
said,
Okay.
I barely knew much about them in those days. In fact,
Okay.
the country
Okay.
didn't know much about. We knew he
Yeah.
fought a battle, but beyond that, whenever you would want to research, there were handicaps. You would not be able to gain access to authentic material, authentic content. So I decided, I think it's time to give back something to Jharkhand, and that is when I started work on Birsa Munda. I co-authored it with another author, um, Ankita Verma. Now, the challenge was, like I mentioned, during the time when these tribal warriors were alive, there was barely anything written about them, because history has always been written from the point of view of kings. It was only
Kings. Yes.
after their death and the subsequent impact of their revolution was discovered a few years later that Britishers and historians started delving into that part of history. So, whatever is written about these tribal warriors, about these tribal heroes, is largely written in hindsight after their deaths. As a result of which, there is limited authenticity insofar as exact dates are concerned, exact characters are concerned. I would say their characters still are, there is a lot of authenticity to their characters, but then the antagonists who they fought against, the issues they were fighting against, I think, there is still a dearth of authentic information. So Birsa Munda is a book where Birsa Munda's character is absolutely real. We've tried to maintain the sanctity of his character in as much as possible. But then we have dramatized situations because we were not very clear who the villains at different points of the story were, except in the end where it was Father Hoffmann, a German missionary who was the kingpin of predatory proselytization that was happening in the entire region. So except for him, there
Shoronagpur.
were obviously other characters who Birsa Munda was fighting against. They included police officers. They included a couple of zamindars, very wily zamindars of that time. But that is where we have dramatized the book a bit. So Birsa Munda was, thankfully it met with great success. In fact, not many books are there on Birsa Munda. And Birsa Munda has come out in 3 different languages. And when a
Oh,
book
wow.
in that genre becomes successful, obviously the next, you are tempted, you are incentivized to expand that genre basically. So the second book in the series was a book called The Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat, again co-authored with an author called Ambalika. Now, The Great Tribal Warriors of Bharat is a non-fiction account. These are essays around 17 tribal warriors from across the country who we barely know about, who we barely have heard about, but whose contribution to the larger freedom struggle has been immense. And finally, a third part of the series was Sido Kanhu. Sido Kanhu,
Sido
you may
Kanhu.
be aware since you are from Bengal.
Yes.
Sido Kanhu led a massive rebellion, a massive revolt in
Again.
1855 in the Santhal Parganas area of present-day Jharkhand. And in terms of their expansion, in terms of geography, um,
Samonto.
their revolution is said to have expanded almost to the outskirts of Calcutta at one point of time. So it was a revolution which lasted for a good 8 to 9 months from 30th June 1855 till about February 1856, where more than 50,000 people participated. It was a people's movement, I would say. So the beauty of these tribal heroes is that in those days, even till a few years back for that matter, connectivity in tribal areas was horrible. Today things have changed. Today, I find mobile connectivity or internet connectivity even in the remotest of areas. But till about 10 years back, even 10 years back, connectivity in rural areas is a nightmare. So imagine was a nightmare, I
In
would
that
say.
era.
So imagine
Hmm.
these tribal heroes having fought against gargantuan challenges
That.
at a time when they had to tread through hills, when they had to tread through zones which were infested
And,
with wild animals, where there was
and they
no
made a massive
mobile.
impact. And they
Yeah.
made a massive impact. It's really.
So
So now, yeah, yeah.
so the tribal hero series is also important because the Congress party, that is where my politics also gets merged with my writing. The Congress party comes with a very entitled mindset where it believes that the freedom struggle of this country was entirely the fiefdom, was entirely the domain of the Congress party. Now, let us be very clear that our freedom movement started a good 100 years before the formation of the Congress party in 1885. The Congress party was formed in 1885. Tilka Maji, one of the greatest tribal warriors, had led his his rebellion in 1783 in the present day Bhagalpur region, which was a good 102 years before the formation of the Congress party. So, I think this narrative, this series around tribal warriors is also important to dispel the notion that Congress party is the sole custodian of our freedom struggle.
Okay, okay. So now from books to politics, we are moving. So coming on the one nation, one election. You know, there are massive allegations uh, against the BJP government by the opposition that it is undermining the federalism by the one nation, one election. And on the other hand, the COVID committee report is saying that they are showing previous history that we had done elections in simultaneously. We used to do it till 1967 from 1952. So what is the truth, and how do you react to the oppositions in this case?
See, the one nation, one election has become imperative for two or three different reasons. Number one, when you have repeated elections all through the year, for example, in the last 1 year, we probably have had five different elections.
Yeah,
If from Lok
Lok
Sabha election,
Sabha, Maharashtra,
yeah.
now Delhi.
So every time there is an election, it impedes the process of governance because for a large period of time, the entire state is in a non-functional mode. Also, it is that many number of times that that's our security personnel, our teaching staff are deputed in different regions, on election duty, all of which is a hindrance for the common man. When it comes to cost, again, because of multiple elections, you don't manage to get the economies of scale which will be available when the Lok Sabha and the assembly elections are clubbed together. So there are enormous benefits of one nation, one election. Most importantly, the country will tread ahead towards the larger millennium goals with the greater focus without getting bogged down by these unending elections where campaigning by top leaders becomes a necessity, because you are not in politics to lose like the Congress party is. If you have to win, you have to give a certain number of days for campaigning. You have to be drawn into that process, which becomes an impediment for the larger governance goals. So these are broadly the reasons why we feel one nation, one election is important. But the kind of criticism that the opposition has put up against it, I think, is puerile to say the least. The first four Lok Sabha and Assembly elections took place together. So were they undemocratic? Were they non-federal? Were they undermining the federal, structure of our country? That's point number one. In any case, the only reason why the election cycles got separated, the Lok Sabha and Assembly elections got separated because Congress party got into the habit of misusing Article 356 and dismissing state governments all across the country. They misused Article 356 some 90 times, because of which the simultaneous elections could not be held. The election cycles changed. So I think, I don't see any reason why one nation, one election should not be adopted in a country which has ambitious goals going ahead. That would result in a lot of efficiency. It would optimize our resource, our usage of resources, and at the same time, it will minimize wastage in the country. I think it is something which the opposition should also welcome, because unlike them having to suffer defeats multiple times and feeling sad over it, they would need to feel sad only once in 5 years.
But don't you think that it will make the political parties less accountable?
Less.
Accountable, as we
No,
don't have, we
I
can चलो भाई ठीक है एक बार इलेक्शन हो गया 5 साल तो ठीक है कुछ नहीं होगा.
no, I
This
I
this
don't
kind
think
of
so.
feeling. Hmm.
Rather, at the end of 5 years, people will be more unforgiving, because people would know that we give you undisturbed time for 5 years. Where is the report card? Sometimes multiple
Okay.
elections take away the accountability. They help you give excuses. So when simultaneous elections are taking place, when simultaneous elections take place, rather people will be more unforgiving, because there will be a clear 5 year term for both the Lok Sabha MP and the MLA. You can compare vis-a-vis who has worked more, who has worked less. So I think people will, in fact, it will help evolve a more ruthless system, a more accountable
Okay.
system, rather than it making people unaccountable.
Okay. So now coming on the Waqf bill, the amendment bill of 2024, which we saw, and now the JPC, we are seeing that is making headlines that 10 opposition leaders has been disqualified from the JPC, including Kalyan Banerjee and many others, and they are alleging that the man Jagadambika Pal, who is heading the JPC, is a partisan and taking orders from the top and just doing that. He is not working neutrally. So how will you react to the whole thing and give a brief about the Waqf bill?
See, as
Yeah.
Yogi ji has articulated very clearly, we believe that the Waqf board in different states has started acting as a land shark, as a land mafia. And much of its land mafia tendencies have been enabled through a particular amendment brought in 1995 in the Waqf Amendment Act of 1995 brought by the then Narsimha Rao government. And that largely pertains to Clause 40, which gives the Waqf board overriding powers to claim any piece of land which they deem belongs to them. So even if there is a tribunal, see, it's like this. Supposing there is a robbery at your home, you go and file a police complaint. More than instead of the police believing you that certain ornaments or certain jewelry has been robbed from your house, the police puts the onus on you to prove that that quantity of jewelry and that quantity of ornaments actually existed in your locker. It's making the whole system lopsided. So the Waqf Amendment Act of 1995 has made the entire process very lopsided. It has given a free run to the Waqf board to grab land across the country. And today the situation is very menacing. It is very worrisome when you see that, uh, you know, apart from the army, apart from our armed forces, and apart from the
Is
railways,
the
the
third largest landowner of India.
the third largest landowner in the country. What is also particularly concerning is that this is simultaneously unfolding with the demography war unfolding in different parts of the country. There are different state governments which have given a free run to illegal migrants. That includes Bengal, that includes the present Jharkhand government. In fact, the Santhal Pargana area is one of the worst impacted areas where the locals are leaving. They are just abandoning their existing land, or their land is being usurped, and they are fleeing to different parts of the state. So these two things put together poses a grave national security threat to the country, and the time to contain that is now. Which is why these two amendments: one is the amendment to the Waqf, re-amending the amendment made in 1995, and the second is to a repeal of the Musliman Waqf Act of 1924. We do feel that these two amendments are quintessential to fortify a national security, to get rid of the mafia which Waqf boards across the country have been reduced to.
And what about the current development? The oppositions are alleging the Joint Parliamentary Committee things which are happening. The Kalyan Banerjee is alleging that Jagadambika is being partitioned and they are taking orders from the
Kalyan
top. Yeah.
Kalyan Banerjee behaves like a clown. He breaks glasses with his hand, and then you've seen how he behaves in meetings. He made some very preposterous comments against Jyotiraditya Scindia in the last session of Parliament, because of which he had to apologize. So I don't think the accusations and the criticism of such people can be taken seriously. Fact is that if you go to his constituency, I'm sure he's under massive pressure due to stakeholders in his constituency who are putting the onus on him to make sure that these amendments don't come. And that is where the minority appeasement politics of TMC has been dangerous for the country. I think, TMC leaders, I won't be surprised if all TMC leaders or behave in a similar manner that uh, this guy is behaving, because obviously they are invested heavily in minority votes, and they are invested heavily in they're invested heavily in in promoting illegal migration from Bangladesh. So TMC will naturally be opposed to any correction in the Waqf loot, which is what they're doing.
Okay. Okay, so we will leave it there. So now coming on the Delhi election. So we saw that a number of interviews are coming, number of podcasts are coming. So the AAP recently, the Kejriwal has numerous said number of times that they are targeting the middle class, and then he also said that if you vote for BJP, you will not get free electricity. So he, and on the other hand, the BJP government is saying that if you don't vote for BJP, you will not get double engine sarkar, you will not get double engine growth. And the Congress is not in the frame that much here. So the both the parties, including your party and the AAP, they are playing with the fear factor among voters. So how do you see the current situation here at Delhi?
Well, never have I seen such angst of the people against the sitting chief minister, and that is evident in the way Arvind Kejriwal is being hooted, or in the way he's being treated by voters in all the constituencies which he's going to. Last week, he was chased away from the Kidwai Nagar, from an area called Kidwai Nagar, which falls in his own constituency. A few days ago, we saw an old lady openly questioning him, saying that आपके वादों का क्या होगा, ये बिल जो है हमारे, आप इतने सारे वादे के बाद भी ये मेरी इलेक्ट्रिसिटी बिल आई है. He ignored her and made some fresh promises. So he has largely, reduced himself to a caricature where every day, 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning, he gets those anxiety pangs and decides that 12 p.m. he's going to do a press conference, and he makes some outlandish promise which he knows is extremely difficult to implement. But that is how desperate he is. That is how despondent he is. He knows at times you don't need the exit poll on the day of polling. After the polling, you don't need the exit polls, because these are the exit polls. His desperation to make a fresh announcement at 12 p.m. every day. And honestly, see, 2014 onwards, when it comes to Lok Sabha elections, BJP has been winning with over 55% vote share. The only reason why Aam Aadmi Party was succeeding in Delhi was because of the freebies, the lavish freebies which they have been distributing. But in the last 2 or 3 years, people have realized that these freebies come for a very heavy cost. The cost includes the toxic air. 33% of Delhi children today are suffering from asthma or asthma related problems. In the last 1 year, just the last 1 year, there have been 18 waterlogging deaths because of complete, non-cleaning of nalas and non-cleaning of drains. In the last 1 year, there have been 26 electrocution deaths because of open wires existing across the country, across the city. 65,000 fake patients were found, registered in the mohalla clinics. And the Delhi High Court last February or last April, they pulled up the Delhi government for the non-performance of the Delhi government schools in Northeast Delhi. So these are very glaring records out in public domain. I have, no, it's very natural for you to witness an anti-incumbency vote at the end of 10 years of, but this kind of an anti-incumbency sentiment where people are livid, people are annoyed, and people are chasing him away, I think that has not been seen in a very long time. So I think the results are pretty clear. It's end game for Aam Aadmi parties in the country.
But recently in a podcast, he accepted that he cannot fulfill the promises, and he alleged that BJP had put him in jail, and that's why he cannot fulfill the promises.
Well, he was put in jail in March, which was 9 years after he first became the chief minister. You think 9 years were insufficient to fulfill promises, and he had saved all action for the last 1 year. What is he trying to say? People have
And they,
seen the
yeah,
level of pollution of Yamuna River, where Chhat Puja, a few years ago, people would celebrate Chhat on the ghats of Yamuna. Now people dread going to Yamuna because of the foams, because of the poisonous water that exists over there. So we have seen, the complete decline of Delhi. In There are certain areas where the tap water looks like thumbs up. That is how dirty the tap water is.
And he's also alleging that the BJP and the Congress are in coalition here. So it's interesting.
See, both
Yeah,
of these parties, the problem with this opposition is that they have zero credibility. So at different points of time, they keep calling each other the B team of the BJP. But then you have to the minimum qualification for you to be the B team of the BJP is that you work in the country's interests, and sadly, none of these two parties have it. So I think it's strange that throughout the country, in fact, these opposition parties, they at one point of time they desperately try to come together because they realize that is the only way they can minimize their losses. When they are not able to strike alliances, then they start calling each other the B team of the BJP. So it speaks a lot about these political parties, the fact that they don't have any credibility, the fact that they don't have any agenda. But I think people largely can see through these machinations now. People can see through these games now, and that is why after 2024 Lok Sabha elections, where BJP suffered a little bit of a setback. I'm calling it little bit because 240, if you have followed Lok Sabha elections over the last 3 decades, 240 is a huge number. It's a big number. Last time Congress party got it was way back in 1984, and yet they believe and yet they behave as if they have defeated BJP. So that's their problem if they choose to be delusional. But like I
mm,
mentioned, even after that
mm.
mini setback in 2024 Lok Sabha elections, we have bounced back in Maharashtra, we have bounced back in Haryana. We are in a comeback mode because people don't see any hope from any of the Indie alliance partners, and specifically when it comes to the Aam Aadmi Party. The Aam Aadmi Party is the biggest scam in Indian politics. I know so many people who in 2012-13 had donated money to them from their hard-earned salaries.
And the Hazare movement. Yeah.
And they are the people who are most livid today. They are the people who, want this party to collapse because they
Okay.
feel cheated. They feel that, they have been completely bullied and they have been taken for a ride.
Okay. Okay. So we will leave it here. Thanks for joining us. It was a pleasure
Thank
to
you.
talk to you. Thank you.
It was lovely talking.